The alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 in the morning, but Rachel was already awake. She had been staring at the ceiling for the past 20 minutes, mentally calculating if she had enough money to buy new shoes for her son before winter really hit. The ones he had now were already letting in water, and she'd seen him stuffing them with newspaper to make them last longer. He never complained, though. That kid never complained about anything, and it broke her heart a little more each day. She rolled out of bed, careful not to wake up little Ben, who was sleeping in the corner of their tiny studio apartment. The place wasn't much. Just one room with a bathroom that barely deserved the name, but it was theirs. The landlord was decent enough to not raise the rent every few months like the last place, and that was something to be grateful for. Rachel moved quietly through her morning routine. Cold water on her face, hair pulled back into a simple bun, and the same black pants and white shirt she wore every day for her morning shift at the diner. She had exactly 3 sets of this outfit, rotating them throughout the week. On Sundays, she'd wash them all at once at the laundromat down the street, sitting there for 2 hours with a library book while the machines hummed. Before leaving, she kissed Ben's forehead gently. He stirred a little but didn't wake up. The neighbor, Mrs. Chen, would come by at 6 to get him ready for school. Rachel couldn't afford proper childcare, but Mrs. Chen had grandkids of her own and understood what it meant to struggle. They had an arrangement that worked, trading favors back and forth. Rachel would play piano at Mrs. Chen's family gatherings for free, and Mrs. Chen would watch Ben when needed. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The diner shift started at 5 and ended at noon, 7 hours of pouring coffee, taking orders and smiling at customers even when her feet screamed in pain. The shoes she wore had thin soles that had worn through months ago, and she'd put cardboard inside to make them last. New shoes for herself weren't in the budget. Not when Ben needed things. Not when the rent was due. Not when they barely had enough for groceries. But Rachel never let anyone see her struggle. She smiled. She laughed with the regular customers, and she worked harder than anyone else on staff. The tips were okay on good days, terrible on bad ones, but every single dollar mattered. She kept a jar at home where all the coins went, and that jar was for emergencies only. It had saved them more times than she could count. After the diner, she had a 2-hour break. Most days, she'd grab something cheap to eat and find a quiet spot to rest her feet. Sometimes she'd go to the library and just sit in the silence, letting the peace of the place wash over her. Other times, she'd walk through the park, watching other people live their lives and wondering what it felt like to not be tired all the time. Then came the afternoon shift at the grocery store, stocking shelves and running the register from 2 until 6. The manager there was all right, didn't hassle her too much and let her take home the bread and produce that was about to expire. That alone saved her maybe $30 or $40 a week on groceries. She'd learned to be creative with almost expired food, turning wilted vegetables into soups and day-old bread into decent meals. By the time she got home, Ben would be finishing his homework at Mrs. Chen's place. She'd collect him, heat up whatever simple dinner she'd prepared the night before, and they'd eat together at their small table. Those moments were everything to her. Ben would tell her about his day, about the things he learned, about his friends at school. He had such a bright spirit despite everything, and Rachel made sure he never felt like they were poor. Poor was just a word, she'd tell him. What mattered was that they had each other. 3 nights a week, she had a third job cleaning offices downtown. She'd drop Ben back at Mrs. Chen's, who'd put him to bed in her spare room. And Rachel would scrub toilets and empty trash cans until midnight. The cleaning company paid cash, which helped, but it also meant no benefits, no security, and the constant fear that one day they'd just decide they didn't need her anymore. But Saturdays. Saturdays were different. Saturdays were the one day that made everything else bearable. On Saturday afternoons, Rachel played piano at the community center. It didn't pay much, barely $60 for a 4-hour shift, but it wasn't about the money. Well, it was about the money because everything was about money when you didn't have any. But it was also about something else, something deeper. Rachel had been a different person once. Years ago, before Ben, before everything fell apart, she'd been a music student with real talent. Professors had said she had a gift, that she could go far if she worked hard enough. She dreamed of concert halls and recordings, of making a living doing the one thing she truly loved. She'd practiced 8 hours a day, her fingers flying across the keys, losing herself completely in the music. Then she got pregnant. The father, a fellow student she thought she'd spend her life with, disappeared the moment she told him. just vanished like he'd never existed. Her family, strict and unforgiving, told her she'd made her choice and would have to live with it. The university scholarship evaporated when she had to take a medical leave. And just like that, everything she'd worked for was gone. She could have given Ben up. People suggested it, said it would be better for everyone. But the moment she held him, squirming and red-faced and perfect, she knew she never could. He was hers. She'd figure it out somehow, and she did figure it out, though not in any way she'd imagined. The dreams of concert halls faded, replaced by the reality of diapers and rent and keeping a tiny human alive. The piano became something she couldn't afford to think about. There was no time, no energy, and certainly no money for such things. But then 3 years ago, the community center had posted a notice looking for someone to play background music during their weekend cafe hours. The pay was almost insulting, but they had a real piano, an old upright that needed tuning, but still, a real piano. Rachel had called before she could talk herself out of it. Now every Saturday she got to play. Sure, it was just background music for people drinking coffee and chatting. Nobody really listened. Not in that focused way audiences listened at real concerts, but that was okay. Rachel played for herself, for the girl she used to be, for the dreams she'd had to set aside. For those 4 hours, her hands remembered what they were made for. She played everything. Classical pieces she'd memorized years ago, jazz standards, old folk songs. Sometimes she'd improvise, letting her fingers wander and discover new melodies. The music poured out of her like water, washing away the exhaustion and worry, even if just for a little while. The community center wasn't fancy. The cafe was small, with mismatched furniture and coffee that tasted burnt more often than not. But it had that piano. And every Saturday, Rachel sat at that bench and remembered who she really was underneath all the struggle. Today was one of those Saturdays. As she walked through the community center doors, nodding at the familiar faces of staff and regulars, she noticed something different. The main hall next door, usually quiet, was bustling with activity. Catering trucks were unloading supplies, and people in expensive-looking clothes were setting up what looked like some kind of party. Must be nice, she thought, then pushed it out of her mind. Other people's lives weren't her concern. She had 4 hours of playing ahead of her, 4 hours of peace, and she wasn't going to waste a second of it wondering about what she didn't have. Rachel sat down at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. They felt like home. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and began to play. In the main hall next door, David Hartley was watching his entire plan fall apart. The party had cost him close to $30,000, and right now every penny of it felt wasted. Decorations hung from the ceiling in cascades of pink and gold. A 3-tier cake sat on a table that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Professional entertainers stood awkwardly in the corner, not sure what to do with themselves. And his daughter, his precious Claire, was having the worst panic attack she'd experienced in months. David had thought he was doing everything right. Claire loved butterflies, so he'd hired people to release live butterflies. She liked magic, so there was a magician. She enjoyed face painting, so there were 2 face painters ready to transform kids into whatever they wanted. He'd invited her entire class, plus kids from her art lessons and swimming club. There was a bouncy castle outside, a candy station, a gift bag for every child worth at least $50. But he'd forgotten the most important thing. Claire didn't like crowds. She didn't like loud noises. And ever since her mother died 2 years ago, she didn't handle overwhelming situations well at all. The panic attack had started small. Claire had gone quiet during the butterfly release, which David had mistaken for awe. Then she'd started pulling at her party dress, the fancy one he'd spent hours picking out. Her breathing had gotten faster. When the DJ started playing music and kids began running around screaming with excitement, Claire had simply shut down. Now she was sitting in a corner, hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking. David was on his knees beside her, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. He ran a tech company worth hundreds of millions. He employed over 3,000 people. He could make decisions that affected markets and industries. But he couldn't help his own daughter breathe. "Claire, sweetheart, look at me," he said softly, trying to keep his own panic out of his voice. "You're okay. You're safe. I'm right here." But Claire couldn't hear him. She was somewhere else entirely, trapped in whatever storm was raging inside her mind. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, her hands gripping the fabric of her dress so tight her knuckles had gone white. David's assistant, Patricia, had already cleared the room. All the kids had been ushered out with their parents, given profuse apologies and those expensive gift bags. The entertainers had been paid and dismissed. The catering staff was packing up. The party was over before it had really begun, and David couldn't care less about any of it. All he cared about was his little girl. "Should I call Dr. Morrison?" Patricia asked quietly. Dr. Morrison was Claire's therapist, the fourth one they'd tried in 2 years. She was better than the others, but even she couldn't perform miracles. "She's in Seattle this weekend," David said, his voice tight. "At that conference." He'd tried everything the therapist suggested. Breathing exercises. But Claire was breathing too fast to follow along. Grounding techniques, asking her to name 5 things she could see, but she wasn't responding. Gentle touch, but sometimes that made it worse. He felt utterly useless watching his daughter suffer and not being able to fix it. This wasn't the first time. The panic attacks had started about 6 months after Julia died. At first, they were rare, maybe once every few months. But lately, they'd been getting worse, more frequent. School assemblies triggered them. Birthday parties clearly triggered them. Even grocery stores sometimes, if they were too crowded. The therapist said it was complicated grief mixed with anxiety. They said Claire was still processing her mother's death. That children her age often couldn't verbalize their feelings, so the emotions came out in other ways. They prescribed medication, which David hated giving her because she was only 10 years old, but he'd tried it anyway. It helped sometimes, but not always. Not today. David would give anything to take her pain away. Anything at all. Every dollar he had, every asset, every achievement. None of it mattered if Claire was suffering like this. Then, in the midst of his desperation, something changed. Claire's breathing was still rapid, but she'd stopped shaking quite as hard. Her eyes, which had been squeezed shut, opened slightly. She tilted her head like she was listening to something far away. "Claire?" David whispered, afraid to break whatever spell had caught her attention. She didn't respond, but she was definitely listening. David stayed quiet, and that's when he heard it too. Piano music. Soft, gentle, drifting in from somewhere nearby. It took him a moment to realize it was coming from the cafe area, where he'd been told someone played background music on weekends. Claire's breathing slowed, just a fraction. Her grip on her dress loosened. She was focusing on the music with an intensity that surprised him. Julia used to play piano, not professionally, just for fun, but she'd been good at it. Some of David's best memories were of coming home from work to find Julia at their grand piano, filling the house with music. Claire used to sit beside her mother on the bench, watching her fingers move across the keys with wonder. They'd sold the piano after Julia died. David couldn't stand looking at it, couldn't handle the silence of keys that would never be played again. Now he wondered if that had been a mistake. Without warning, Claire stood up. Her legs were unsteady, but she was moving with purpose. David scrambled to his feet, ready to catch her if she fell, but she was walking toward the door that connected to the cafe area. "Claire, honey, where are you going?" he asked, but she didn't answer. She just kept walking, following the music like it was a lifeline pulling her out of deep water. David followed close behind, his heart pounding. Patricia started to come too, but he held up a hand, signaling her to stay back. He didn't know what was happening, but he didn't want to disrupt it. The cafe was small and shabby compared to the main hall. Mismatched tables and chairs, a counter with coffee that smelled burnt fluorescent lights that flickered slightly, and in the corner, at an old upright piano that had seen better days, sat a woman. She was maybe in her early 30s, wearing clothes that had been washed so many times they'd faded to almost nothing. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she had the kind of tired eyes that came from not sleeping enough for too long. But her hands on those keys were magic. Claire walked straight toward her, and the woman looked up. David saw her take in his daughter's tear-stained face, the expensive party dress, the obvious distress. Something shifted in the woman's expression. Without missing a note, she changed what she was playing. The melody became softer, slower, more soothing. Like a lullaby, but not quite. Like a gentle hand on a fevered forehead. The woman smiled at Claire, the kind of smile that held no judgment, no questions, just warmth. David watched from the doorway, barely breathing, as Claire stood beside the piano. The woman kept playing, kept smiling, and somehow, impossibly, Claire's breathing continued to slow. "Would you like to sit with me?" the woman asked softly, her voice barely audible over the music. She didn't stop playing, didn't break the spell of the melody, but somehow made room on the bench. Claire nodded just once and climbed up to sit beside the stranger. David's instinct was to stop her, to protect her, but something held him back. Maybe it was the way Claire's shoulders had started to relax. Maybe it was the gentle competence in the woman's manner. Or maybe it was just desperation, the willingness to try anything if it might help. The woman played, and Claire listened, and slowly, miraculously, the panic attack began to subside. David stood frozen in the doorway, watching his daughter transform from a frightened, overwhelmed child back into herself. The woman spoke occasionally, quiet words David couldn't quite hear, and Claire even responded a few times. 20 minutes passed, then 30. David didn't move. He just watched as this stranger, this woman playing piano in a shabby community center cafe, did what an army of expensive therapists hadn't been able to do. She gave Claire peace. When the woman finally finished playing, Claire was calm. Not just calm, but actually smiling a little. The woman said something that made Claire laugh, just a small sound. But it was the most beautiful thing David had heard in weeks. He didn't know who this woman was or why her music had reached his daughter when nothing else could. But standing there in that doorway, watching his little girl breathe normally again, David knew one thing for certain. This moment, this connection, was worth more than anything money could buy, and somehow he had to find a way to keep it in their lives. Rachel had noticed the girl the moment she walked into the cafe. You couldn't miss her, really. The fancy pink dress, the tear-stained cheeks, the way she moved like she was underwater. Rachel had seen that look before, on her own face in the mirror during the worst days after Ben's father left. That look of someone drowning while standing on dry land. So she'd changed the music without thinking about it, something softer, something that felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. Her grandmother used to hum a melody like this when Rachel was little and couldn't sleep. She'd never known the name of it, just the feeling it gave. Safe. Calm. Home. The girl responded immediately, and Rachel felt her heart squeeze. When the child came closer, Rachel could see she was probably 9 or 10, with dark hair and eyes that had seen too much sadness for someone so young. Without really planning to, Rachel made space on the bench. "Would you like to sit with me?" she asked, keeping her voice gentle, keeping the music going because stopping felt wrong somehow. The girl nodded and climbed up. Up close, Rachel could see the expensive fabric of her dress, the kind that probably cost more than Rachel's entire month of groceries. But money didn't matter much when you were hurting. Rachel had learned that the hard way. She kept playing, letting the music do most of the talking. After a few minutes, she asked, "What's your favorite color?" The girl's voice came out scratchy from crying. "Purple." "Purple's a good choice," Rachel said, transitioning into a piece that somehow felt purple to her, if music could have colors. "Like lavender fields or grape juice?" "Like the sky right before night," the girl said, and Rachel smiled because that was a beautiful answer. "That's the best kind of purple," she agreed. "Do you have a favorite animal?" "Butterflies." The girl's voice got a little stronger. "We had butterflies today at my party, but it was too loud and there were too many people and I couldn't breathe right." Rachel's fingers never stopped moving across the keys. Sometimes too much of even good things can feel overwhelming. It's okay to need quiet. "My mom used to play piano," the girl said suddenly, "before she died." And there it was, the real weight this child was carrying. Rachel's heart broke a little more. She knew about loss, about missing someone so much it physically hurt. She thought about her own mother, who'd stopped talking to her the day she decided to keep Ben. 7 years of silence because Rachel had chosen, differently than her mother wanted. "I bet your mom played beautifully," Rachel said softly. "She did. She used to play this one song, I don't remember what it's called, but it went like this." The girl hummed a few notes, off-key but recognizable. It was Claire de Lune, one of Rachel's favorites. "I know that one," Rachel said and began to play it. The girl's eyes went wide and fresh tears spilled over, but these seemed different, lighter somehow, like rain after a long drought. They sat together and Rachel played through the entire piece. The girl leaned against her slightly, and Rachel let her, this small person who needed comfort from wherever she could find it. When the song ended, Rachel moved into something else, then something else, just letting the music flow. "What's your name?" the girl asked after a while. "Rachel. What's yours?" Claire, that's a lovely name. Like the song I just played. Claire de Lune means Claire of the Moon. Claire's eyes lit up. Really? My mom never told me that. Maybe she didn't know, or maybe she was saving it for when you were older, Rachel said. Parents do that sometimes, save up little treasures to share. Do you have kids? Claire asked. I have a son. His name is Ben, he's 8. Does he like piano too? Rachel smiled. He likes it when I play, but he's more interested in building things. He takes apart everything he can get his hands on and tries to put it back together. Drives me a little crazy, but he's got a good mind for figuring out how things work. She didn't mention that they couldn't afford real toys, so Ben's building mostly consisted of saving cardboard boxes and old containers, creating elaborate structures that filled their tiny apartment. She didn't mention that she worried constantly about giving him a better life, more opportunities, more of everything. My dad tries really hard, Claire said quietly. He wanted today to be perfect for my birthday. But sometimes when he tries too hard, it makes everything worse. I feel bad because he spends so much money and then I ruin it. You didn't ruin anything, Rachel said firmly, stopping the music for a moment to look directly at Claire. Listen to me. You didn't ruin anything. Sometimes our bodies and minds need things that are different from what other people think we need. That's not your fault. That's not anyone's fault. It just is, but everyone left. The whole party ended because of me. The party ended because your dad loves you enough to know what you needed was more important than what everyone else expected. That's not a bad thing, Claire. That's actually pretty wonderful. Claire thought about this, wiping her nose on her sleeve, which was such a normal kid thing to do that it made Rachel smile despite the expensive dress probably being ruined. Can I tell you a secret? Rachel asked. Claire nodded. When I was younger, I wanted to be a real pianist. Not just playing in cafes, but on big stages with orchestras and audiences who came just to listen. I practiced all the time. I had teachers who said I could do it. What happened? Life happened. I had Ben and his dad left, and I had to make choices about what mattered most. For a long time, I was really sad about giving up that dream. I thought I'd failed. But you still play, Claire pointed out. I do. And you know what I figured out? Music doesn't care where you play it or who's listening. It still feels the same in my heart, whether I'm on a stage or in this little cafe. And today, right now, I gotta help you feel better. That matters more than any concert hall ever could. Claire looked at her with something like wonder. You're really nice. Rachel laughed, a real laugh that surprised her. You're pretty great yourself. From the corner of her eye, Rachel had been aware of the man standing in the doorway. Tall, expensive suit, the kind of watch that cost more than her yearly rent. He'd been there the whole time, just watching. Claire's father, obviously. The resemblance was clear in the shape of their faces, the same dark eyes. Rachel had been poor long enough to recognize wealth when she saw it. This man was the kind of rich that most people only saw on television. The kind that came with private schools and vacation homes and never having to check price tags. The kind that made people like Rachel invisible most of the time. But he was looking at her now like she'd just performed a miracle. And maybe in a way she had. Not because she was special, but because she'd been in the right place at the right moment, with the right song in her hands. Claire turned and saw her father. Dad, Rachel plays Claire de Lune. Did you know my name is in a song? The man walked over, and Rachel could see his eyes were red like he'd been crying or trying not to. He crouched down to Claire's level. Are you feeling better, sweetheart? Yeah, Rachel helped me. She plays piano like Mom did. He looked up at Rachel and she saw something in his face that made her uncomfortable. Gratitude, yes, but also something else. Something that felt like he was seeing her. Really seeing her, and she wasn't used to that. She was used to being overlooked. Being just another person serving coffee or stocking shelves or cleaning toilets. Being invisible was safer somehow. Thank you, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. I don't know what you did or how you did it, but thank you. I've been trying everything for months and nothing's worked like this. Rachel felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't good with praise, never had been. I just played some music. It's not a big deal. It's the biggest deal in the world to me, he said. There was an awkward pause where Rachel didn't know what to say. Her shift was technically over. She needed to get home to Ben, to figure out what to make for dinner from whatever was left in their mostly empty refrigerator. Back to real life, where moments like this didn't happen to people like her. I should probably get going, she said, standing up from the bench. My son's waiting for me. Wait, the man said, standing too. Please, can I at least get your name? Your contact information? I'd like to thank you properly. Rachel hesitated. Something about this felt dangerous, though she couldn't explain why. Like if she gave him her information, if she let this moment extend beyond right now, something would change that couldn't be changed back. But Claire was looking at her with those hopeful eyes, and the father seemed so genuinely desperate to show gratitude, and Rachel was tired of always being suspicious of kindness. "Rachel Miller," she said, "but really you don't need to thank me. I was happy to help." She gave him her phone number, the cheap prepaid phone that sometimes didn't have minutes loaded on it, but it was all she had. He put it in his phone, which looked like it cost more than her entire month's wages. "I'm David Hartley," he said, "and this is Claire." "I know," Claire said. "We already did names." David smiled at his daughter, and Rachel could see how much he loved her. It was written all over his face in every gesture. Whatever else this man was, he was a good father. She could recognize that much. Rachel gathered her worn bag and her jacket with the broken zipper. She felt suddenly very aware of how she must look to them, with her faded clothes and tired face, back to being invisible, back to reality. "Bye, Rachel," Claire said. "Thank you for playing for me." "Anytime, Claire. You take care of yourself." As Rachel walked out of the cafe, she could feel David's eyes on her back. She didn't look back. She just kept walking back to her life, to Ben, to the endless cycle of work and worry that waited for her. She had no idea that everything was about to change. Rachel didn't hear from David for 3 days, and she'd almost convinced herself that nothing would come of their meeting. Rich people said thank you all the time and didn't mean anything by it. She'd served enough of them at the diner to know that. They lived in a different world, and that world didn't intersect with hers except in brief, meaningless moments. She was wrong. The call came on Tuesday afternoon, right in the middle of her 2-hour break between the diner and the grocery store. Rachel almost didn't answer because she didn't recognize the number, and unknown numbers usually meant bill collectors or scammers. But something made her pick up. "Hello? Rachel, this is David Hartley. We met on Saturday at the community center." Her stomach did a strange flip. "Oh yes, how's Claire?" "She's been asking about you constantly. She wants to know when she can hear you play again." He paused, and Rachel could hear the sound of traffic in the background, like he was calling from a car. "Listen, I know this might sound strange, but I was wondering if we could meet. To talk. I have something I'd like to discuss with you." Rachel's first instinct was to say no. Nothing good ever came from meetings with people who had money. But curiosity got the better of her. "What kind of something?" "A job offer, actually. But I'd prefer to discuss it in person if that's all right. Could we meet for coffee?" "Anywhere you'd like. Whatever time works for you. A job offer." Rachel's mind raced. She didn't have any skills that someone like David Hartley would need. She wasn't a secretary or an accountant or anything professional, unless he needed someone to clean his house, but he'd have a whole service for that. Not one random woman he'd met once. "I don't understand," she said carefully. "What kind of job?" "Please just meet with me. One conversation, that's all I'm asking. If you're not interested after we talk, no hard feelings." Rachel thought about her bank account, which currently had $43 in it. She thought about Ben's shoes and the leak in their bathroom ceiling that the landlord kept promising to fix. She thought about how she was one car breakdown, one illness, one unexpected expense away from losing everything. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Wednesday afternoon, 2 o'clock? There's a coffee shop on 5th Street, the one with the blue awning. I'll be there." "Thank you, Rachel." After she hung up, Rachel stared at her phone for a long time. This was probably a mistake. Rich people didn't just offer jobs to poor single mothers they'd met once in a community center. There had to be a catch, something she wasn't seeing. But $43 in the bank didn't leave much room for pride, so she'd go. She'd listen. And if it sounded wrong, she'd walk away. Wednesday came too fast. Rachel put on her best outfit, which wasn't saying much. A pair of black pants that weren't too worn and a sweater that didn't have any visible holes. She spent 10 minutes trying to do something with her hair before giving up and pulling it back like always. She wasn't fooling anyone. She was what she was. The coffee shop was neutral territory, the kind of place where she'd spent countless hours on her breaks, nursing a single cup of cheap coffee and trying to rest her feet. She got there early and ordered water, because the $3 a coffee would cost mattered. David arrived exactly on time, and Rachel noticed he wasn't wearing a suit today. Just jeans and a nice shirt, like he was trying to look normal. It didn't quite work. Everything about him still screamed money. from his watch to his shoes to the way he carried himself. But she appreciated the effort. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sitting across from her in the small booth. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Food?" "I'm fine," Rachel said, even though she was starving. She'd skipped lunch to make sure she had enough food for Ben's dinner. David ordered a coffee, and then they sat in awkward silence for a moment. He seemed nervous, which surprised her. What did someone like him have to be nervous about? "I'm just going to be direct," he finally said. "Claire hasn't stopped talking about you since Saturday. She's been calmer, happier. Yesterday she asked if we could get a piano for the house. We sold ours after my wife died because I couldn't stand looking at it. But Claire wants to learn now. Because of you." Rachel didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. "The therapists we've been working with, they've been saying Claire needs stability and positive coping mechanisms. Music seems to be that for her. You seem to be that for her." He took a breath. "I'd like to hire you to spend time with Claire. To play music with her, maybe teach her piano if you're willing. To just be there as someone she connects with." Rachel's mind went blank for a second. "You want to hire me to be friends with your daughter?" "Not friends, exactly. More like a mentor, a companion, someone who understands what she's going through and can help her in ways I can't." He leaned forward, earnest. "Look, I know this is unusual. I know we're essentially strangers. But I watched what happened on Saturday. In 20 minutes you did what months of therapy and medication haven't been able to do. You gave her peace." "That was just one moment," Rachel said. "I can't promise it would work again. I'm not a therapist. I'm just someone who plays piano. You're someone who's been through hard things and came out the other side still kind. Claire needs that. She needs to see that it's possible to lose something important and keep going." Rachel felt her throat tighten. "Mr. Hartley, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I have a son. I have 3 jobs. I don't have time to add something else, even if I wanted to." "That's the thing," David said quietly. "This wouldn't be something extra. This would replace all 3 jobs. I'm offering you a salary of $80,000 a year to be Claire's companion and music teacher, plus housing if you need it. We have a guest house that's sitting empty. You and your son could live there, no rent. Full health insurance for both of you, and your son could attend the same school as Claire if you wanted." Rachel's heart stopped. $80,000. She made maybe $28,000 across all her jobs, working herself to death. $80,000 was more money than she'd ever imagined having. It was impossible. It was too much. "Why?" The word came out almost as a whisper. "Why would you do this?" "You don't know me. I could be anyone." "I had someone look into you," David admitted, and Rachel felt a flash of anger. "I'm sorry, I know that sounds invasive, but I had to know who I was potentially bringing into my daughter's life. You're exactly who you seem to be. Someone who works hard, takes care of her kid, and never complains about the hand she's been dealt. Your boss at the diner says you're the most reliable person he's ever employed. Your supervisor at the grocery store says you're the first to volunteer for extra shifts. The community center director says you've never missed a Saturday in 3 years. Rachel felt exposed, like all her struggles had been laid out for inspection. "You had no right to do that." "You're right. I'm sorry. But Rachel, I'm desperate here. My daughter is struggling and you helped her. I'm not asking you to do anything inappropriate. I'm just asking you to be present in her life. To play music with her. To show her that it's okay to hurt and still keep living. That's all. What if it doesn't work? What if Saturday was just a fluke? Then we'll figure it out together. But I don't think it was a fluke. Claire knew something was missing in her life. And for the first time since her mother died, she found a piece of it. Rachel thought about Ben, about his shoes with holes, about the apartment with the leaking ceiling, about the constant fear that they'd end up on the street. She thought about how tired she was, how every day felt like climbing a mountain only to have to climb it again the next day. But she also thought about Claire's tear-stained face, the way the girl had leaned against her, trusting her completely. She thought about how it felt to be that child once, lost and scared and needing someone to just understand. "I need to think about it," she said. "This is a big decision. I need to talk to my son, of course. Take whatever time you need. But Rachel, can I ask you something? When was the last time someone offered to help you? Not because you earned it or deserved it or worked for it, but just because they could?" The question hit her harder than it should have. She couldn't remember. Every single thing she had, she'd fought for. No one had ever just offered her something freely. "I'm not looking for charity," she said, her voice harder than she intended. "This isn't charity. This is me paying someone to do something valuable that I can't do myself. Claire needs you. And honestly, from what I've learned about your situation, it sounds like you could use a break. There's no shame in accepting help, Rachel. She stood up, needing to get out of there before she started crying. I'll call you in a few days with my answer. That's all I ask. Rachel walked out of that coffee shop feeling like the ground had shifted under her feet. $80,000. A house, health insurance. No more working 3 jobs. No more choosing between feeding Ben and fixing her car. No more exhaustion that went bone deep. But it felt too good to be true. And in her experience, things that felt too good to be true usually were. That night after she'd put Ben to bed, Rachel sat at their small table and cried. Not sad tears exactly, just overwhelmed tears. The kind that came when you'd been holding everything together for so long that the possibility of letting go felt terrifying. She thought about what David had said. When was the last time someone had offered to help her? Never. The answer was never. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to let someone try. Rachel talked to Ben the next morning before school. She sat him down at their small table with a bowl of cereal and tried to figure out how to explain something she barely understood herself. Honey, I need to talk to you about something important. Ben looked up at her with those bright eyes that saw too much for an 8-year-old. Are we moving again? The question broke her heart. They'd moved 4 times in his short life, always because rent went up or landlords sold buildings or they needed something cheaper. He'd learned to pack his things quickly and not get too attached to places. Maybe, she said carefully, but this time it would be different. It would be a good thing, I think. She told him about Claire, about the panic attack, about playing piano. She told him about David's offer, trying to keep it simple. A job helping a girl who needed music. A place to live that was better than what they had. A chance for things to be easier. Would I have to change schools? Ben asked. That was his first concern, not the house or the money. Just whether he'd lose his friends. You could go to a new school, a really good one. But only if you wanted to. We could figure it out. Ben was quiet for a long time, stirring his cereal around in circles. Is it because we don't have enough money? Rachel wanted to lie to protect him from knowing how close to the edge they always were. But Ben deserved honesty. He lived this life too. We don't have a lot of money, that's true. This would help with that. But it's also about something else. This little girl, Claire, she lost her mom, and she's really sad. I think maybe I can help her feel better. The same way I try to help you feel better when you're sad. By playing piano? By playing piano. By being there. By understanding. Ben nodded slowly. Mom, are you happy? The question surprised her. What do you mean? You're always tired. You work all the time. Sometimes I hear you crying at night when you think I'm asleep. His voice got small. I don't want you to be sad anymore. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. She tried so hard to hide her struggles from him, but kids always knew. They always saw more than adults wanted them to see. I'm happy when I'm with you, she said truthfully. But yeah, I'm tired. I'm tired of worrying all the time. This could help with that. Then we should do it, Ben said simply. And maybe I can be friends with Claire. She probably needs friends if her mom died. That was her son, 8 years old, and already thinking about what other people needed. She'd done something right, even if everything else felt like a mess. Rachel called David that afternoon and said yes. 2 weeks later, they moved into the guest house. Rachel had expected something small, but the guest house was bigger than any apartment she'd ever lived in. 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, a bathroom that didn't leak, windows that let in actual sunlight. A small yard where Ben could play. The main house where David and Claire lived was the kind of place Rachel had only seen in magazines. All clean lines and expensive furniture and rooms that seemed to have no purpose except looking beautiful. It made her uncomfortable at first, like she was playing pretend in someone else's life. But Claire made it easier. The girl had practically tackled Rachel when they arrived, so excited she could barely speak. She dragged Rachel to the main house to show her the piano David had bought. A beautiful grand piano that probably cost more than Rachel used to make in a year. Will you teach me? Claire asked, her eyes shining. Will you teach me to play like you do? I'll teach you everything I know, Rachel promised. The first few weeks were strange. Rachel kept waiting for the catch, for the moment when this all fell apart. But it didn't fall apart. David was true to his word. He gave her space, respected boundaries, and never made her feel like hired help. He treated her like someone whose opinion mattered, whose presence was valued. She and Claire fell into a routine. Every day after school, they'd spend 2 hours at the piano. Rachel taught her the basics: how to read music, how to position her hands, how to feel the rhythm in her body before letting it flow through her fingers. Claire was a quick learner, eager and focused in a way that reminded Rachel of herself at that age. But it wasn't just about piano. They talked while they played. Claire would tell Rachel about her mom, about the things she missed and the things she was afraid of forgetting. Rachel would listen and share her own stories of loss, of her mother who'd stopped speaking to her, of Ben's father who'd disappeared. "Does it ever stop hurting?" Claire asked one day. "No," Rachel said honestly, "but the hurt changes. It becomes something you carry with you instead of something that crushes you, and eventually you can remember the good things without the pain swallowing everything else." Claire's panic attacks didn't disappear completely, but they became less frequent. When she felt one coming on, she'd come find Rachel, and they'd play together until the storm passed. Music became her anchor, the thing that brought her back to herself. Ben and Claire became inseparable. They were only 2 years apart in age, and they understood each other in ways other kids didn't. Both of them knew what it meant to miss someone, to have life not turn out the way it was supposed to. They'd build elaborate forts in the yard and put on concerts for David and Rachel, Claire on piano and Ben on makeshift drums made from overturned buckets. Rachel started playing publicly again, small venues at first, local coffee shops and community events. David would come, always sitting in the back with both kids clapping louder than anyone else. He'd encouraged her to try, even offered to pay for professional recordings, but Rachel wanted to do this part herself, to prove she could. One night, about 6 months after they'd moved in, Rachel was playing a late set at a downtown venue. It was a proper concert hall, small but real, with an audience that actually came to listen. Her hands moved across the keys, and she lost herself in the music the way she used to years ago. When she finished, the applause was genuine, warm, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. After the show, David was waiting by the stage door with both kids. Claire was bouncing with excitement, and Ben looked proud enough to burst. "You were amazing," David said, and there was something in his voice that made Rachel's heart skip, something more than just employer appreciation. She'd noticed it building over the months, the way he looked at her sometimes, the way he'd find excuses to talk to her beyond just discussing Claire's progress, the way he'd laugh at her jokes and remember small things she'd mentioned in passing. And if she was honest with herself, she'd noticed her own feelings changing too. It had been so long since Rachel had thought of herself as someone who could be wanted, not for what she could do or how she could help, but just for who she was. The idea terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Thank you for this," she said, gesturing vaguely at everything. The opportunity to play, the life they'd built, the second chance she never thought she'd get. "Thank you for saving my daughter," David replied, "and for teaching me that the most valuable things in life aren't things you can buy." Claire tugged on Rachel's hand. "Can we get ice cream to celebrate?" "Ice cream sounds perfect," Rachel said. They walked to an all-night diner, the four of them looking like a family to anyone who saw them. And maybe they were becoming one, in their own unconventional way. Not perfect, not traditional, but real, built on shared loss and healing and the understanding that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when you finally let someone help. Rachel thought about that Saturday afternoon 6 months ago, when she'd been just another tired woman playing piano in a shabby cafe, when she'd changed her music for a crying girl in a pink dress and had no idea it would change everything. She'd spent so many years believing she had to do everything alone, that accepting help was weakness, that struggling was just what life looked like for people like her, but she'd been wrong. Sometimes strength meant letting someone see your pain and offer you a hand out of it. Sometimes it meant saying yes when every instinct screamed to say no. A year later, Rachel and David got married in a small ceremony in their backyard. Claire played piano during the reception, a piece she'd composed herself called "The Day Everything Changed." Ben was the ring bearer, walking down the aisle with the kind of confidence that came from finally feeling secure in the world. Rachel still played piano every Saturday at the community center, not because she needed the $60 anymore, but because she needed to remember where she'd come from, needed to remember that girl who'd been drowning but kept swimming anyway. Needed to stay connected to the person she'd been so she'd never forget what it felt like. Sometimes people would ask her how she got so lucky, finding a rich man to rescue her. And Rachel would smile and correct them gently. She'd rescued herself over and over again, for years before David came along. All he'd done was give her a chance to stop drowning and start living. The rest? The healing and growing and building a life that was work they'd all done together. Because that's the thing about real-life stories. They're never about one person saving another. They're about people finding each other at exactly the right moment and deciding to hold on. They're about music that bridges gaps between strangers. They're about children who teach adults how to be brave. They're about second chances and choosing to believe that maybe, just maybe, good things can happen to good people. And sometimes, they're about a poor single mom who played piano to calm a girl in crisis, clueless that the girl's father was watching and seeing not just what she did but who she was. Someone worth knowing, someone worth keeping, someone who'd been extraordinary all along, just waiting for someone else to notice.